My name is Zara Cross, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family. But that night, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. I'm 31 years old, and I've spent the last 8 years building my career as a senior partner at Obsidian Legal Group in Burlington, Vermont. It's a boutique firm that handles high-stakes corporate litigation, and I've earned every single accolade through 16-hour days in cases that would break most people. My corner office overlooks Lake Champlain, and on clear mornings, I can see the Adirondack Mountains stretching across the horizon like a promise of something better. But success has a way of making you lonely, especially when the people who should celebrate you most are the ones who resent you for it. My father, Victor Cross, built Cross Industries from nothing. He started with a small construction company in the 1980s and turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire spanning real estate development, manufacturing, and hospitality. The Cross name means something in Vermont business circles, and Victor never let anyone forget it, growing up as his only daughter. I thought I'd inherit not just his wealth, but his respect. I was wrong about the second part. My older brother Marcus has always been the golden child. He's charming in that effortless way that comes naturally to some men, the kind of person who can walk into any room and immediately become its center. He works for the family business, but works is a generous term. Marcus spends most of his time playing golf with potential clients and taking long lunches that somehow count as business meetings. Meanwhile, I was the one who stayed up all night studying for the LSATs, who graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Law, who built my own career from scratch without asking for a single favor from the Cross family name. But in Victor's eyes, I was still just the daughter who chose to work for someone else instead of the family business. The tension between us had been building for years, but it reached a breaking point last October when my grandmother Eleanor passed away. Eleanor Cross was 93 years old and sharp as a blade until the very end. She'd been the matriarch of our family since I was a child, and while Victor controlled the business empire, Eleanor controlled the family legacy. She owned the original Cross family estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion on 50 acres of prime Lake Champlain waterfront. The property had been in our family for 4 generations, and it was worth at least $12 million. More importantly, Eleanor had always been my champion. When Victor dismissed my achievements, Eleanor would pull me aside and tell me how proud she was of the woman I'd become. She'd studied law herself back in the 1950s, before women were expected to have careers, and she saw something of herself in my determination to succeed on my own terms. 2 weeks after Eleanor's funeral, Victor called a family meeting. He said we needed to discuss Eleanor's will and the distribution of her assets. I assumed this would be a straightforward reading with a family lawyer, but Victor had other plans. I've reviewed Eleanor's will with our attorney, he announced over dinner at the family estate, and I think it's best if we handle this matter privately within the family. Marcus nodded along, cutting into his steak like this was the most normal thing in the world. But something in Victor's tone made me uneasy. What do you mean, handle it privately? I asked. I mean, we don't need to involve outside parties in family business, Victor replied. Eleanor left everything to be divided equally among the family, the estate, the investments, the trust funds. We'll handle the distribution ourselves. I set down my fork. Dad, that's not how estate law works. Eleanor had a will, and it needs to be probated through the court system. There are legal requirements for Zara. Please, Victor interrupted. This is family business, not a courtroom. We don't need lawyers and judges telling us how to honor Eleanor's wishes. But I knew better than to trust Victor's interpretation of anything, especially when it came to money. I'd like to read the will myself, I said. As Eleanor's granddaughter, I have a right to see the actual document. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor's jaw tightened, and Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's not necessary, Victor said. I'm telling you what it says. Eleanor wanted everything split equally among the family. End of discussion. Then you shouldn't have any problem showing me the will, I pressed. If it's that straightforward. Let me read it myself. Victor's eyes flashed with anger. You don't trust your own father? I trust documents, I replied. I'm a lawyer, Dad. I know the difference between someone telling me what a legal document says and actually reading it myself. The argument escalated from there. Victor accused me of being ungrateful and suspicious. Marcus jumped in to defend him, suggesting I was being disrespectful to Eleanor's memory by questioning the family's handling of her estate. But I held my ground. I'm not leaving this house until I see that will, I said finally. Victor stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Then you'll be waiting a long time, he said, because that will is locked in my safe, and it's staying there until we're ready to execute it properly. Dad, you can't just... I can do whatever I want with my mother's estate, Victor snapped. And if you don't like it, you can take your law degree and your fancy opinions and get out of my house. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared down at his plate. Clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict his father, Victor stood behind his chair, breathing heavily, his face flushed with anger. I looked around the dining room where I'd eaten thousands of meals, where Eleanor had taught me to play chess, where I'd announced my acceptance to Harvard Law School. This house held every significant memory of my childhood. But in that moment, it felt like a prison. Fine, I said quietly. But this isn't over. I left that night, but I didn't go home instead. I drove to my office and spent the next 6 hours researching everything I could about Eleanor's estate. I pulled property records, tax filings, and business registrations. I called contacts at other law firms and made discreet inquiries about Eleanor's legal affairs. What I discovered changed everything. Eleanor hadn't used the family's regular attorney for her will. 3 months before her death, she'd hired a different lawyer, a man named David Sterling, who specialized in estate planning for high-net-worth families. Sterling's firm, Sterling & Associates, was based in Montpelier, and according to my research, Eleanor had met with him several times over the summer. More importantly, I found out that Victor had been lying about the will's contents. Through a contact at the probate court, I learned that no will had been filed for Eleanor's estate. In Vermont, estates over a certain value are required to be probated within 30 days of death. It had been 6 weeks since Eleanor passed away, and Victor hadn't filed anything. That's when I knew he was hiding something. The next morning, I called Sterling's office and requested a meeting. David Sterling was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and had the hairy look of someone who'd been caught in the middle of a family dispute. When I introduced myself as Eleanor's granddaughter, he immediately became defensive. I'm sorry, Miss Cross, but I can't discuss your grandmother's estate with you, he said. The executor has requested that all communications go through him. The executor? I asked. You mean my father? Sterling shifted uncomfortably. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of the estate, but I could read between the lines. If Victor was the executor, that meant he had legal control over Eleanor's assets until the will was probated. And if he was refusing to probate the will, he could essentially freeze the estate indefinitely. I spent the next week trying to get information through official channels. I filed a petition with the probate court requesting that Eleanor's will be produced. For examination, I sent formal letters to Victor demanding that he fulfill his legal obligations as executor. I even tried to get Marcus to intervene, but he refused to get involved. Every door I tried to open led to the same dead end. Victor controlled the estate, and he wasn't talking. That's when I decided to take a different approach. I'd been thinking about this all wrong. Instead of trying to force Victor to reveal the will, I needed to find out what he was hiding. And the best way to do that was to get the information directly from the source. David Sterling might not be willing to talk to me as Eleanor's granddaughter, but he might be willing to talk to me as a potential client. I spent 2 days preparing for what would either be the most brilliant or most reckless gambit of my career. I researched Sterling's firm, studied their client base, and crafted a persona that would appeal to their target market. On a cold Thursday morning in November, I walked into Sterling & Associates wearing a different version of myself. I'd styled my hair differently, chosen a more conservative outfit, and adopted the slightly breathless manner of someone who'd recently come into money and needed legal guidance. "I'm interested in estate planning," I told the receptionist. "I've heard wonderful things about Mr. Sterling's work." 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from David Sterling in his wood-paneled office, pretending to be a successful entrepreneur who'd recently sold her tech startup and needed help managing her newfound wealth. "I'm particularly interested in complex estate structures," I said, leaning forward with enthusiasm. "I've heard you handled the Eleanor Cross estate, and I was hoping you could walk me through some of the more sophisticated strategies you used." Sterling's eyes lit up. Like most lawyers, he enjoyed talking about his clever legal work, especially when it involved complex estates. The Cross estate was indeed a challenging case, he said. "Mrs. Cross had very specific wishes about how her assets should be distributed, and we had to be creative to ensure her intent was honored." "What kind of specific wishes?" I asked, pulling out a notebook and adopting the eager manner of someone taking notes. And then Sterling made the mistake that would unravel everything. "Well," he said, settling back in his chair, "Mrs. Cross was particularly concerned about ensuring that her granddaughter received her fair share of the estate. She felt that the family had a tendency to overlook the granddaughter's achievements, and she wanted to make sure that pattern didn't continue after her death." My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. "How did you structure that?" "Mrs. Cross left the bulk of her estate directly to the granddaughter," Sterling continued. "The family estate, the investment portfolios, even the controlling interest in several family trusts. She felt that the granddaughter had proven herself to be the most capable family member, and she wanted to ensure the family legacy would be in good hands." I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. Eleanor had left everything to me, not split equally among the family, but everything. The estate, the investments, the trusts, all of it, and the rest of the family. I managed to ask. "They received token amounts," Sterling said. Mrs. Cross felt that her son and grandson had already benefited significantly from the family wealth and didn't need additional inheritance. She was quite clear about wanting to break the pattern of male primogeniture in the family. I spent another 20 minutes asking follow-up questions, gathering as much information as I could without arousing suspicion. By the time I left Sterling's office, I had a complete picture of what Victor had been hiding. Eleanor had left me an estate worth approximately $8 million. The family mansion, her investment portfolio, her stock holdings in Cross Industries, and her personal assets were all mine. Victor and Marcus had each received $50,000 and some personal items. But that was it. Eleanor had essentially disinherited them in favor of me. And Victor had been concealing that fact for 6 weeks, but knowing the truth and proving. It were two different things. I still needed to get my hands on the actual will. And Victor had made it clear that he wasn't going to cooperate. That's when I came up with the plan that would change everything. I'd been thinking about this wrong from the beginning. I was trying to force Victor to do the right thing, but Victor had never done the right thing in his life unless it served his interests. I needed to make it serve his interests. Or better yet, I needed to make it serve someone else's interests. David Sterling was a lawyer with a practice to protect. He'd been hired by Eleanor to execute her will, and he had a professional obligation to see that her wishes were carried out. But he was also being pressured by Victor to keep quiet about the will's contents. What if I could eliminate that pressure? I spent the weekend researching Sterling's firm and their financial situation. Like many small law practices, they had cash flow issues and a significant amount of debt. Sterling personally guaranteed a business loan that was coming due in 6 months, and based on their recent billings, they were going to have trouble making the payment. On Monday morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Sterling," I said when he answered, "this is Zara Cross, Eleanor Cross's granddaughter. I think we need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Cross, I already told you that I can't discuss your grandmother's estate." "I'm not calling about the estate," I said. "I'm calling about your business loan with First National Bank, the one that's due in 6 months. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Mr. Sterling, I'm a corporate lawyer. I know how to read financial records. Your firm owes the bank $400,000. And based on your current cash flow, you're not going to be able to make the payment. What does that have to do with? I'm prepared to solve your problem. I interrupted. I'll pay off your loan, plus a $50,000 bonus in exchange for you doing your job. My job? Your job is to execute Eleanor Cross's will according to her wishes. But you can't do that while my father is interfering with the probate process. So I'm going to remove that interference. Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Miss Cross, what you're suggesting sounds like, what I'm suggesting is that you honor your professional obligations to your client. I said, Eleanor Cross hired you to ensure her will was executed properly. She paid you to do a job, and you've been prevented from doing it by someone who has no legal authority to interfere with the probate process. I let that sink in before. Continuing, I'm offering you the financial security to do the right thing without worrying about the consequences. Your loan gets paid off, you get a bonus, and you fulfill your professional obligations. Everyone wins. Sterling was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he spoke. If I were to agree to this arrangement, what would you need from me? I need you to file Eleanor's will with the probate court immediately. I said, and I need you to notify all interested parties, including my father and brother, that the will is being probated. And if your father objects, let him object. The court will determine whether his objections have merit, but he can't stop the legal process once it's started. Sterling agreed to think about it over the weekend. I knew he would accept. He didn't have a choice. His firm was facing bankruptcy, and I was offering him a way out. On Tuesday morning, I received a call from Sterling's office. Miss Cross, he said, I've decided to proceed with the probate of your grandmother's will. I'll be filing the necessary paperwork with the court this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I'll have the payment transferred to your account within the hour. 2 hours later, David Sterling walked into the Washington County Probate Court and filed Eleanor Cross's will for probate. The document was now part of the public record, and anyone could request a copy. I was in my office when Sterling called to confirm that the filing was complete. It's done, he said. The will is now officially in probate. I hung up the phone and immediately called the probate court. I'd like to request a copy of the Eleanor Cross will that was filed today. I said, certainly, we can have that ready for pickup in about an hour. I spent that hour pacing my office, alternating between excitement and nervousness. I was about to have proof of what Victor had been hiding, but I also knew that once I picked up that will, there would be no going back. At 3 o'clock, I walked into the probate court and requested Eleanor's will. The clerk handed me a sealed envelope containing a copy of the document. I waited until I was back in my car before opening it. The will was everything Sterling had described and more. Eleanor had left me not just her estate, but a detailed letter explaining her reasoning. She wrote about how proud she was of my achievements, how she watched me build my career despite Victor's lack of support, and how she wanted to ensure that I had the resources to continue making my mark on the world. But it was the final paragraph that brought tears to my eyes. Zara, you have always been the strongest member of our family, even when others couldn't see it. You've earned your success through hard work and determination, and you've never asked for anything you didn't deserve. I'm leaving you my estate not just because I love you, but because I trust you to use it wisely. Make me proud and never let anyone make you feel less than the remarkable woman you are. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and cried for 10 minutes. Then I dried my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and drove to the family estate. It was time to tell Victor what I'd discovered. I found him in his study, reviewing financial reports from the family business. Marcus was there too, sitting in the leather chair by the window. They both looked up when I walked in, and I could see from their expressions that they already knew what was coming. Hello, Dad, I said. Closing the door behind me, I have something that belongs to me. I placed the copy of Eleanor's will on his desk. Victor's face went pale. Where did you get this? From the probate court, I said. Where it was filed this afternoon by Eleanor's attorney, as required by law. Victor's hands shook as he picked up the document. Marcus leaned forward, trying to read over his father's shoulder. "This is impossible," Victor said. "Mother would never have what?" I interrupted. "Would never have recognized my achievements? Would never have trusted me with the family legacy? Would never have seen through your attempts to control everything?" Victor's face was turning red. "She was manipulated," he said. "That lawyer must have convinced her to change her will. This isn't what she really wanted." "Actually, it's exactly what she wanted," I said. She explained. Her reasoning very clearly in the letter she attached to the will. "Would you like me to read it aloud?" Marcus finally found his voice. "Zara, this is crazy. We're family. We can work something out." I turned to look at my brother. "Work something out?" "Like you worked something out when you refused to help me get information about the will? Like you worked something out when you sat there and watched Dad lie to me for 6 weeks?" "We didn't know," Marcus said weakly. "You didn't want to know?" I corrected. "There's a difference." Victor had been reading through the will, his face growing more ashen with each page. "This will destroy the family," he said finally. "No, Dad." I said, "Your lying and manipulation destroyed the family. I just exposed it." Victor looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was fear. For the first time in my life, Victor Cross was. "Afraid of me, what do you want?" he asked. "I want what's mine," I said. "I want the estate that Eleanor left me. I want the investment accounts that she put in my name. I want the stock holdings that she transferred to me. And I want you to stop pretending that you have any say in how I use them. And if I refuse, then I'll take you to court," I said. "I'll contest your actions as executor. I'll have you removed from the position for breach of fiduciary duty. I'll make sure everyone in Burlington knows that Victor Cross stole from his own mother's estate." The room was silent for a long moment. Victor stared at the will, his jaw working as he processed what he was reading. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, looking like he wished he could disappear. Finally, Victor looked up. "What about the family business?" "Eleanor's stock holdings give you a controlling interest in Cross Industries." "I am aware of that," I said, "and I'll be exercising that control very carefully." "Zara, please," Victor said, and for the first time in years, his voice was pleading. Rather than commanding, "This business is my life's work. I built it from nothing, and now it belongs to me," I said. "Eleanor trusted me with it because she knew I would make better decisions than you would." Victor's face crumpled. "She was my mother." "Yes, she was," I said. "And she watched you dismiss me and undervalue me for 30 years. She watched you treat me like an outsider in my own family. She watched you prioritize Marcus over me simply because he's a man. And she decided that enough was enough." I walked over to Victor's desk and picked up the will. "I'm going to make you an offer, Dad." One time only, Victor looked up at me with desperate hope in his eyes. "I'll let you keep your position as CEO of Cross Industries," I said. "You can continue running the day-to-day operations, but I'll be the chairman of the board, and all major decisions will go through me. If you can prove that you're capable of treating me as an equal partner, we can work together. If not, I'll find someone who can." "And Marcus?" I looked at my brother, who was staring at the floor. "Marcus can keep his current position, but he'll have to actually work for his salary. No more golf meetings and long lunches. If he wants to be part of this family business, he needs to contribute to it." Victor was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "We'll try it your way." "Good," I said. "There's one more thing." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a document I prepared earlier. "This is a formal apology letter acknowledging that you concealed Eleanor's will from the family and attempted to defraud me of my inheritance. You're going to sign it, and I'm going to keep it as insurance against any future attempts to undermine my authority." Victor's face flushed with anger. "You want me to admit that I'm a thief?" "I want you to admit that you made a mistake," I said, "and that you're committed to not making it again." Victor read through the letter, his hands shaking with emotion, but in the end, he signed it. He didn't have a choice. As I drove home that night, I thought about Eleanor and the letters she'd written. She'd been right about me being the strongest member of the family, but I'd never felt strong. I felt like I was constantly fighting to prove myself, constantly struggling to earn respect that should have been freely given. But that night, for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd won. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and business meetings. I took control of Eleanor's estate, which included not just her personal assets, but also her business interests. I moved into the family mansion, which had always felt more like home to me than anywhere else. Most importantly, I began making changes at Cross Industries. I implemented new hiring practices that prioritized merit over connections. I established a charitable foundation that focused on supporting young women in business and law. I modernized the company's operations and expanded into new markets. Victor kept his end of the bargain for the most part. He continued to run the day-to-day operations, but he consulted with me on all major decisions. It wasn't always easy. 30 years of established patterns don't change overnight. But we found a way to work together. Marcus struggled more with the transition. He'd never had to prove himself before. And suddenly being held accountable for his performance was a shock. But eventually, he found his footing and began making real contributions to the company. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the power, it was the respect. For the first time in my life, Victor and Marcus treated me as an equal. They asked for my opinions, they listened to my ideas, and they acknowledged my expertise. But the victory came at a cost. Word of our family dispute had spread through Burlington's business community, and there were whispers about the Cross family. Drama. Some people respected my determination to claim what was rightfully mine, while others criticized me for challenging my father's authority. I didn't care. I'd spent 30 years trying to earn their approval, and I was done. Eleanor had taught me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up for yourself. Even when it's uncomfortable, 6 months after Eleanor's will was probated, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. It was David Sterling, the lawyer who had helped me uncover the truth. "Miss Cross," he said, "I wanted to thank you personally. Your payment didn't just save my practice. It allowed me to maintain my professional integrity. I've been feeling guilty about concealing your grandmother's will, and I'm grateful that you gave me the opportunity to do the right thing." "You were in an impossible position," I said. "Victor put you between a rock and a hard place. I just gave you the tools to get out of it." "Still," Sterling said, "what you did took courage and intelligence. Not many people would have thought to approach the problem from that angle." After he left, I sat in my office looking out at Lake Champlain. The water was calm that day, reflecting the autumn colors of the surrounding mountains. I thought about Eleanor and the legacy she'd left me, not just financial wealth, but the knowledge that I was worthy of respect and recognition. I thought about the lawyer I'd essentially purchased, not with corruption or bribery, but with the simple recognition that sometimes doing the right thing requires the right incentives. Sterling had wanted to honor Eleanor's wishes, but he'd been trapped by Victor's interference and his own financial desperation. I'd given him the freedom to choose integrity over self-preservation, but most of all, I thought about the family I'd fought so hard to be accepted by. We were still a family, but the dynamic had changed permanently. I was no longer the daughter begging for approval. I was the matriarch who had earned her place through strength and determination. That evening, I drove to Eleanor's grave. I'd had a new headstone installed, one that reflected her true legacy as the woman who had built our family's foundation and ensured its future. I placed fresh flowers on the grave and sat quietly for a while, watching the sunset over the lake. "I made you proud, didn't I?" I said aloud. I didn't let them make me feel less than I was. The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was Eleanor's voice answering me. She'd always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. She'd seen my potential and made sure I had the resources to fulfill it. As I drove home to the mansion that was now mine, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here. I had started as a daughter fighting for her father's approval and ended as a woman who didn't need anyone's approval but her own. The house was quiet when I arrived, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like home in a way it never had before. I walked through the rooms where I'd grown up, now seeing them through the eyes of their new owner, in the study where Victor had refused to show me Eleanor's will. I saw my future office, in the dining room where he'd dismissed my concerns. I saw a place where I would host business dinners and charitable events, but it was in Eleanor's old bedroom that I felt the strongest connection to my transformation. She'd left me a letter in her jewelry box, one that the lawyers hadn't found. Because it wasn't part of the official will, it was a personal message, written in her careful handwriting. My dearest Zara, if you're reading this, then you found a way to claim what's rightfully yours. I knew you would. You've always been a fighter. Even when you didn't realize it, I'm sorry that I couldn't give you the gift of your father's respect while I was alive, but I can give you something better. The knowledge that you don't need his respect to be worthy of love and admiration. You've built a remarkable life for yourself, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Use my gifts wisely, but more importantly, use them to make the world a better place for other women who are fighting the same battles you fought. Never let anyone make you feel small again. You are a cross, and cross women are stronger than anyone gives us credit for. All my love, Eleanor. Folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jewelry box. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Eleanor's favorite chair, looking out at the lake. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the daughter, who desperately wanted her father's approval, to the woman who had learned to approve of herself. I thought about the lawyer I'd bought, not with money alone, but with the promise of redemption and the freedom to choose integrity over fear. Most of all, I thought about the quiet power of knowing your worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. The next morning, I woke up in my own house, surrounded by the legacy of a woman who had seen my potential and made sure I had the tools to fulfill it. I got dressed in my favorite suit, the one that made me feel powerful and confident, and I drove to work at the company I now controlled. Victor was already in his office when I arrived, reviewing reports and preparing for the day's meetings. He looked up when I knocked on his door, and I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before: respect. "Good morning, Zara," he said. "I wanted to discuss the Henderson acquisition with you before the board meeting." "Of course," I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "What are your thoughts?" As we talked about business strategy and market opportunities, I realized that this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not just recognition or financial success, but the simple acknowledgement that I belonged at the table where decisions were made. Later that day, I was reviewing contracts in my office when my assistant knocked on the door. "Miss Cross," she said, "there's a young woman here to see you. She says she's interested in joining our legal team." I looked up from my paperwork. "Send her in." The woman who entered my office was probably 25 years old. With the same determined expression I'd worn at her age, she was well-dressed, but nervous, carrying a portfolio that she gripped tightly in her hands. "Miss Cross," she said, "my name is Sarah Chun. I'm a recent graduate of Vermont Law School, and I'm hoping to start my career at Cross Industries." I studied her for a moment, seeing something of myself in her determination. "What makes you think you'd be a good fit for our legal team?" "I've researched your company extensively," she said. "I know that you've been implementing new policies that prioritize merit over connections, and I think that's exactly the kind of environment where I could thrive." I smiled. "Tell me about a time when you had to fight for something you believed in." Sarah's eyes lit up, and she launched into a story about challenging a discriminatory hiring practice at her previous internship. As she spoke, I saw the same fire that had driven me to uncover Eleanor's will, the same refusal to accept injustice simply because it was easier than fighting. "You're hired," I said when she finished. "But I want you to know that working here isn't just about practicing law. It's about being part of a legacy of strong women who refuse to accept less than they deserve." Sarah smiled, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Cross. I won't let you down." After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the cycle of empowerment that Eleanor had started. She'd given me the tools to claim my place in the world, and now I was in a position to help other women do the same. That evening, I drove to the family estate for dinner with Victor and Marcus. It had become a weekly tradition, our way of maintaining family bonds while acknowledging the new reality. Of our relationships, how was your day? Victor asked as we sat down to eat. Productive, I said. I hired a new lawyer for the legal team, Sarah Chen, fresh out of law school. She reminds me of myself at that age. Marcus laughed. God help us all. It was a joke, but there was affection in it. We'd all learned to appreciate the strength that I'd always possessed, even when it made them uncomfortable. As we ate, Victor brought up the Charleston project, a new development that would be one of our biggest undertakings. I think we should proceed carefully, he said. The market is uncertain, and we don't want to overextend ourselves. I agree, I said, but I also think we need to be bold. Eleanor always said that great success requires great risks. Victor nodded. Your grandmother was a wise woman. Yes, she was, I said, and she taught me that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. We spent the rest of the evening discussing business strategy and family matters. It wasn't the relationship I dreamed of having with my father and brother, but it was honest and respectful. We'd all learned to appreciate each other's strengths and acknowledge each other's contributions. As I drove home that night, I thought about the woman I'd become. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval, but I wasn't bitter about the journey that had brought me here. Every challenge had made me stronger. Every disappointment had taught me something valuable. I thought about David Sterling, the lawyer whose desperation had made him complicit in Victor's deception, but whose integrity had ultimately prevailed when given the chance. I'd bought his. Honesty, not with corruption, but with the opportunity to choose doing the right thing over protecting himself. I thought about Eleanor, who had seen my potential even when I couldn't see it myself. She'd given me more than money or property. She'd given me the knowledge that I was worthy of respect and recognition. Most of all, I thought about the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I'd fought for what was mine and won, not through manipulation or deception, but through intelligence, determination, and the courage to stand up for myself when no one else would. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd had to buy my own family's lawyer to get them to tell the truth. But sometimes the most elegant revenge is simply ensuring that justice prevails. Even when it requires creative solutions, 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Vermont Business Journal as Businesswoman of the Year. The article talked about my innovative leadership at Cross Industries and my commitment to supporting women in business. But what meant the most to me was the quote they included from Eleanor's letter. Crosswomen are stronger than anyone gives us credit for. I kept that magazine cover framed on my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what's possible when you refuse to accept being underestimated. The final vindication came a year later, when Cross Industries posted record profits under my leadership. Victor had to admit, both privately and publicly, that Eleanor's decision to leave me the controlling interest had been the right one. The company was thriving, our employees were happier, and our reputation in the business community had never been stronger. But the moment that truly validated everything I'd fought for came during our annual shareholders meeting. Victor stood at the podium to present the year's financial results. And when he finished, he said something that brought tears to my eyes. Before we close today's meeting, I want to acknowledge someone who has transformed this company through her vision and leadership. My daughter, Zara Cross, has proven that Eleanor's faith in her was not misplaced. She has honored our family legacy while building something even greater for the future. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was thinking about the young woman who had sat in the same room years ago, watching her father dismiss her achievements and wondering if she would ever be enough. I was enough. I had always been enough. It had just taken the right moment, the right strategy, and the courage to bet on myself to prove it. As I walked out of that meeting, I thought about all the women who were still fighting the battles I'd fought, the daughters seeking their father's approval, the employees overlooked for promotions, the entrepreneurs struggling to be taken seriously in male-dominated industries. I thought about Sarah Chen, who is now one of our most promising young lawyers, and the scholarship fund I'd established in Eleanor's name to help other women pursue legal careers. I thought about the mentorship program I'd started and the board positions I'd accepted an organization supporting women in business. Eleanor had given me the tools to claim my place in the world, and I was using those tools to help others do the same. The lawyer I'd bought had become an unexpected ally, working with me on pro bono cases for women facing discrimination in my workplace, but most importantly, I'd learned that the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. I hadn't torn down my family or destroyed my father's legacy. I'd taken what was rightfully mine and made it better. That night, I stood in the garden behind the mansion, looking out at the lake where Eleanor used to take me fishing as a child. The water was still and dark, reflecting the stars above. I could almost hear her voice carried on the wind, telling me how proud she was of the woman I'd become. "Thank you, Eleanor," I whispered to the night. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see in myself." And in that moment, I knew that the best. Revenge is living a life so full and successful that your enemies become irrelevant. I had built something beautiful from the ashes of disappointment, and no one could ever take that away from me. The woman who had once begged for her father's approval had become the woman who didn't need anyone's approval but her own. And that, more than any inheritance or business success, was the greatest victory of all. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away, but sometimes the most powerful revenge is staying and rewriting the rules entirely. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments. Because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever.